Hello and welcome to adminchat Excel functions with me, Mike Thomas. Before I dive into the content of this session, just a little bit about me. I've worked in IT training for over 30 years, and although I deliver training on a wide variety of applications, for the past few years I've chosen to focus on Excel. Now, when we talk about functions in Excel, we're talking about worksheet functions. Think of a worksheet function as a pre-programmed formula. It's something that you type into a cell that generates a value. There's actually over 500 functions in Excel, and in fact, Microsoft are adding new functions on a regular basis. Although many of the newer functions are only being made available to users who subscribe to Microsoft 365. Most of the functions that I'll cover today are available to all Excel users. It doesn't matter which version of Excel you're using. However, if there are any that are 365 only, I'll point those out as we get to them. Obviously, we don't have time to cover every function, and to be honest, even if we did, a good 70 to 80% of them are very niche. A typical PA or EA would struggle to find a use for them. In fact, a typical Excel user would struggle to find a use for them. So in this session, I'm going to focus on some of the more popular and commonly used ones. I've tried to use scenarios that PAs and EAs can identify with. And even though I've never worked as a PA or EA, I've delivered training to and provided support to thousands of EAs and PAs in my career. So I think I have an idea as to what's relevant to you and what your pain points are. So, without further ado, let's get started. So let's start with the COUNTIF function. A lot of my examples revolve around a fictitious company called Excellent Ice Cream. They're a company based in the US that make and sell different flavours of ice cream. This happens to be a vacation tracker for the people on the manufacturing team, and it's for one particular month. The letter Y indicates that the person has booked a vacation. It's Y for yes. So I need to calculate how many days vacation each person has booked. So I'll go over to AG6 to do the first one. All functions begin with an equal sign like formulas, followed by the name of the function. So if I start typing COUNTIF, as soon as I type a few characters, it pops up a list, and that list is all the functions whose name begins with what I've typed. Now I can see COUNTIF in the list, so rather than typing the rest of the function name, I will double click on it. And it puts the function name into the cell and adds the open bracket. All functions follow the same pattern, equals, function name, open bracket. What goes inside the brackets is known as the function's parameters. Some functions just have one parameter, some have two, some have three, some have four. Each parameter is separated by a character, a parameter separator. For most countries, it's a comma. There's a few countries in the world that use a semicolon, so it just depends on how your computer is configured. But if you're not sure, look at the little pop-up and you can see that just after the word range there is a comma. So that tells me that for my computer's configuration, I'm going to be using a comma as the separator. So I have two parameters for the COUNTIF function. The first parameter is the range, which means the range of cells I want it to look at. So in this case, it is B6 through to AF6. Now I'll just move this help pop-up out of the way. I can do that by pointing to it, getting the four little arrowheads and just moving it. So then I can see the function. So I'll put in my comma. That's the separator, and then the criteria. The criteria in this example is the letter Y, and that has to go in quotes because it's text. So open double quotes, type a Y, close double quotes, and close the brackets. So that's how the Countif function works. You specify Countif as the function name and then the two parameters inside the brackets. The first parameter is the range that you want it to look at. The second parameter is the criteria. So I'll press enter and you can see that gives me 2. If I go and changed one of these blank cells to a Y because Ted has booked another day's vacation, it automatically changes the total to 3. And then rather than typing in the function for all the other cells, I'll just copy that down. Let's look at another example of Countif. I'm organising the team meal. So I've got my list of people, I've got the meal choices, and I've got whether or not they've paid. And I need to tell the restaurant ahead of time how many people want chicken, how many want steak, and how many want the vegetarian. So I'll go up to G4 and I'll type equals COUNTIF, open brackets. The range is going to be B5 to B17, comma. And for the criteria, I can either type the word chicken in double quotes, or I can reference cell F4 because F4 contains the word chicken. Close the brackets and enter. And that counts the number of times the word chicken appears in B5 to B17. Now, if I'm going to copy that formula down so that it then picks up the word steak and the word vegetarian, I do need to edit the formula. I need to make B5 to B17 absolute or fixed, which I can do by using the F4 shortcut key to put the $signs in. So that means that when the formula is copied down at column G, it will change the F4 to F5 and F6, but it'll keep B5 to B17 constant, which is what we want because we want all three formulas to reference B5 to B17. So if I just copy those formulas down, now we've got 5 and 2. And if I change any of the data in column B, it'll update those numbers. Let's go and try it. Faith decides that they want steak. So I changed that and it's reduced the number of chicken and increased the number of steak. To count how many people have paid, I can go over to K4 and put equals COUNTIF, open brackets, select C5 to C17, comma, and I'll have to type a Y in as the criteria here because I don't have a cell I can reference that with. And then do the same thing to count the number of people who haven't paid, select the range, comma, and in double quotes put an N. Let's look at a third example. Here I want to count the number of employees who have received a rating of 4 or 5. So this is the annual appraisal rating. We need to know how many people have had a rating of 4 or 5. So I can use the COUNTIF function. I can select the range, which is the cells with the numbers. And for the criteria, I can say greater than or equal to 4. That's one way to do it. Or I could say greater than 3. As long as you get the logic correct, it doesn't matter. Close the brackets and enter. It doesn't like that, and the reason it doesn't like that is because when you're using a greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, you have to put the whole criteria in double quotes. Yes, I know double quotes should normally only be used for text, but there are exceptions to the rules, and this is one exception. So enter that in and we can see that we have 5 employees who've got a rating of 4 or 5. We'll do one more example of COUNTIF. In fact, this is a slightly different function. This is COUNTIFS, also known as Countif S. It's COUNTIF with an S on the end. And you'd use that when you've got more than one criteria. So here we have a list of IT support tickets for the department that you're working for a couple of days in April, and you've been asked to count how many tickets were logged on the 12th of April and have the status of resolved. So here I'm going to use, as I say, Countif S, open brackets. And the criteria range and criteria are typed in as pairs. So we select the first criteria range, and I'll take the dates first, which is A5 to A17, then my comma. The actual criteria, I'll choose G4 because that's got the date in it, then another comma. Criteria range 2, I'll select column C, comma, and the criteria itself is going to be a Y, and that goes in quotes because it's text, and you just carry on in that vein. So it's the range, the criteria, the range, the criteria, the range, the criteria. You can have as many as you like, and that gives us 4. So that tells us that there were 4 IT support tickets with the status of resolved yes, and they were logged on the 12th of April. Now actually you can use Countif S if you only have one criteria. So if I go and edit the formula and get rid of that second criteria and just leave it as let's have a look at how many tickets were logged on the 12th of April, it does work. So a lot of people now only use Countif S rather than making the distinction, do I have one set of criteria, do I have 2 sets of criteria? A lot of people are just using Countif S all the time. That way you don't have to think too much as to which function to use. Moving on to a different function, let's look at the SUMIF function, and there's a similar function, SUMIFS. So let's start with the SUMIF function. Imagine that you are a PA or an EA who is working on a couple of different projects, and your boss has asked you to log how many hours you are working on each project. I need to add up the numbers in column C, but only for a particular project, and put the answers over in column F. So in F5 I will put equals SUMIF, open brackets. Now with the SUMIF function, the range with the numbers comes at the end. A lot of people get it into their heads, they think sum, and they immediately select the cells with the numbers in. But no, you can see from the little help pop up that the numbers come as the third parameter. The first parameter and the second parameter are actually like the COUNTIF function. It's the range and the criteria. So in this case, the range is column B. That's the range that contains the name of the project. So I'll select B5 to B15, comma. The criteria is project 123, which I can either type in double quotes or pick up from E5, comma, and the sum range is the cells with the numbers in. So select those. That is the cells that contain the numbers to be added up. Close the brackets and press enter. So that tells me that last week I spent 33 hours working on project 123. Let's do the same thing for project 456. So equals SUMIF, open brackets, select the range where the criteria will be, select the criteria itself, and select the cells with the numbers. And that tells me how many hours I spent on project 456. Let's have a look at another example of SUMIF. In fact, for this one, I'm going to use SUMIFS. And the reason is there's 2 criteria. I need to know how much it cost us for the IT support for any incidents that have been resolved where they were reported on the 12th of April. To do that, I'm going to put equals SUMIFS, open brackets. Now, just to confuse you, with SUMIFS, the sum range does go at the beginning. So I'll start by selecting D5 to D17, then a comma. Then the first criteria range will be the range with the dates in, comma. The first criteria will be G4 because that's the cell with the 12th of April, comma. The second criteria range is the resolved column, column C, and the second criteria is the letter Y. So what I'm saying here is add up the numbers in column D, but only where column A contains the 12th of April 2022 and column C contains the letter Y. And that gives us the total cost. So like with Countif S, you can use SUMIFS with one criteria or multiple criteria. So let's move on now and look at some functions that are called the text functions. They allow you to manipulate text. Typical scenario here is where I want to combine data together from different cells into a single cell. Here I want to combine the data from columns A and B into a single cell showing all the names, but I do want a space between the first name and the surname. So I go to G4 and I put equals concatenate. That's the name of the function, equals concatenate. What goes inside the brackets are the cells that you want to combine together, plus any actual characters, like in this case the space. And any actual characters have to go inside double quotes. So I start by selecting A4, then a comma. The comma is the parameter separator, as I said before. Then a space, and that has to go in double quotes. So it's double quotes, space, double quotes. And that indicates that I want an actual space character after the first name. Then another comma and B4. And you can have as many items as you like within the brackets. I'm limiting it to 3. Close the brackets and enter. And then copy that down. I can do a similar thing to combine together the city, state and zip code. But what I'm going to do here is have 2 dashes between the city and the state and 2 dashes between the state and the zip code. The only reason I'm doing that, because you probably wouldn't do that in the real world, is to show you that you can have any characters between 2 text elements. So again, equals concatenate, select the city, comma, and then in double quotes, 2 dashes, comma, and then the state, comma, then again in double quotes, 2 dashes, comma, and then the zip code. So I'm combining together what's in C with 2 dashes, what's in D, 2 dashes, what's in E. Enter that, and I get city, 2 dashes, state, 2 dashes, zip code. And copy that down. Now for this one, I want to combine the initial, which is the first character of the first name, with a full stop and a space, and the surname and a space and the state. So I will use concatenate again in column G. Equals concatenate. To get the first character of the first name, I'll use a different function. I'll use the left function. The left function allows me to extract 1 or more characters from the left hand side of a cell. So in this case it's A4, then a comma, and the number of characters is 1. Close brackets. So I'm actually embedding the left function inside the concatenate function. Then I'll put a comma, and then in double quotes I will put full stop space, then another comma, and I will then choose the surname, then a comma, then another space again in double quotes, and then the state. So that one, a little bit more complicated. It's joining together the first character of the first name with a full stop and a space, with the surname, with a space, with a state. And copy that down. Another function you've got, and this is only available in some of the later versions of Excel, although it has been around since Excel 2016. So unless you're working with 2013 or an older version, then you will have this function, is TEXTJOIN. And what TEXTJOIN does is it allows you to combine cell entries together, very much like CONCATENATE, but it allows you to specify one or more characters as a separator, as long as it's the same separator. So in this case, I want to combine the title, the first name, the surname, the street address, the city and the postcode with a comma and space between each item. If you had different characters between each item, then TEXTJOIN wouldn't work. So if you had commas between some items and full stops between others, then it wouldn't work. And we've also got the added issue here of a blank cell. So if I go over to H4 and put equals TEXTJOIN, the first parameter is the delimiter. This is the character or characters that will act as the separator, and they go in double quotes. So in this case, I said comma space, and then I want a comma, but this comma is not part of the delimiter. It's the comma between the parameters. Then for the next parameter, I need to choose true or false. And one, as you can see, is ignore empty cells. The other is include empty cells. I'm going to choose for this one, ignore empty cells, so put a true. And then the next parameter is the text. Now, one of the great things about the TEXTJOIN function is if the text is in consecutive cells, you can just specify the range. You don't have to say A4, B4, C4 and so on. You can just specify the range. Close the brackets and enter. And what we now have is the title, comma space, first name, comma space, surname, comma space, and so on. If I copy that formula down, what we don't have is an extra space between 40 Winchester Road and the postcode. But if I go and change that true to a false and copy the formula down, now we have an extra comma and space between the 40 Winchester Road and the postcode. Now, you may have noticed that when I was using concatenate, there was a very similar function appeared in the list, which is concat. Concat works exactly the same as concatenate, but it also has some additional features. So in fact, Microsoft suggests that if you've got the concat function, and I think it's been in Excel since 2016, then you should use that in preference to concatenate. So if I wanted to use it like concatenate, then what I could do is go up to H4 and put equals concat, open brackets, select A4, comma, and then a space in double quotes, comma, B4, comma, space in double quotes, comma, C4. Close the brackets and enter. Now I could have used concatenate for that. But rather than thinking, do I use concatenate, do I use concat, just use concat. Here, I want to combine together the data from columns D, E and F with no spaces. Now, because the cells are in a range, D, E and F, they're next to each other, I can use concat. That's a benefit that concat has over concatenate. Concatenate will not allow you to specify a range. You have to specify individual cells. So if I put equals concat, open brackets, and select D, E and F, you can see I've defined the range, close the brackets and enter, and copy down. So personally, I would say use CONCAT in preference to concatenate. Another useful feature when it comes to working with text, which isn't actually a function, is text to columns. So imagine that you are responsible for organising the playlist for the Christmas party. And this is the playlist that you've got. You've extracted this from your music player. But what you want is you want to show the name of the song and the name of the artist without the duration. But we want to split it up into 3 columns. We want to have the name of the song in column B, the name of the artist in column C. So I will select A1 to A9 and go to Data, Text to Columns. Now I can't use fixed width here because the songs and the artists are not the same number of characters. I have to use delimited. The delimiter between the song and the artist is a dash. The tab is the default, so I will untick tab, I will select other and type a dash and click next. Then I need to tell it where I want it to put the data that I'm going to generate, and that is going to start in B1. So I'll type B1 and click finish. And what it's done is it split the data based on the dash. Then I want to remove the times, the durations from column C. So I'll select the data in column C and do it again. Data, text to columns. Again, I'll use delimited and click next. This time the delimiter is an open bracket and click next. And I'll leave the destination as C1. So what it will do is put the names of the artists in column C and it will put the durations in column D, and I can then get rid of them. Alternatively, I can select in the data preview the column with the durations and say do not import and then click finish. Now this is a slightly tidier version of the example I've just shown you, but the problem that we've got, and you can't see it, is that in the track names and the artists, because there were spaces either side of the dash and there was a space before the open bracket, there are spaces at the end of the track names and at the beginning of the artist name, and we can see that if I double click on a cell, you can see the cursor is not quite right up to the A, and if I double click on this cell, the cursor is also not right up to the E, and there is a space before the M. So I need to remove the extra spaces. And that's where the trim function comes in. So I'll go over to E4 and put equals trim, open brackets, and then select A4, close brackets, and enter. And copy that down. And do the same thing with the artist. Equals trim, open brackets, select B4, close brackets, enter, and copy that down. And what we've now got is we've now got a nice tidy list without the additional spaces. So let's wrap up this session with a look at lookup functions, and let's start with VLOOKUP. So what's the purpose of VLOOKUP? Well, the idea is that you type something into a cell and then you are looking up that value down a column and returning a value from another column further to the right. So in this case, I want to look up the phone number that's in C3, and I want to look that up in column G and return the value from the corresponding row on column J. So I go to C4 because that's where I want the answer to go, and type equals VLOOKUP. The first parameter of the VLOOKUP function is what you're looking for. So in this case, it's C3. The second parameter is called the table array. Now, this isn't just the column that you're looking in. It's got to start in the column that you're looking in. So it's got to start at column G. but it's got to include the column where the answer's coming from. So in this case, because I'm looking for the contract renewal, it's got to include up to column J. If I was looking for the model, I could just set the table array as G and H. If I was looking for the colour, I could set it for G, H and I. But in this case, it's got to start at G and go up to J. Then a comma. The col index number is the column index number. So every column within the table array has an internal number. In this case, G is 1, H is 2, I is 3, J is 4. And it's the column number of where the answer's coming from. In this case, it's 4. And then finally, we have to choose true or false. And as you can see there, that refers to exact match or approximate match. Now, most VLOOKUPs will be an exact match because in this case we are looking for a specific phone number down column G. If it doesn't find that phone number, so if that phone number isn't in column G, we want it to return an error. If there was a similar phone number in column G, we wouldn't want it to return that phone number. We'd want it to return an error. So in that case, we choose exact match. Close the brackets and enter. And it's returned October 22, which for that phone number is correct. So what if I changed that phone number to one that didn't exist? Let me stick a 2 at the end. Now it returns an NA. Because I used false, it's got to be an exact match. And if it can't find that phone number in that list, then it returns an NA. If I had used true, then it would find what it considers to be the closest match to it, but that isn't necessarily the one that we want. So in this example, we want to use false for an exact match. For the employee ID, we can't use VLOOKUP as it stands because VLOOKUP will only pick up the answer from a column to the right, and the employee ID is to the left of the phone number in the lookup table. So we have a couple of options. One option would be to move the ID so it is to the right of the phone number. Another option is to use XLOOKUP instead of VLOOKUP. XLOOKUP is a newer version of VLOOKUP. It's only available in certain versions of Excel, but if you've got it, it's preferable to use it. It's simpler to use, but at the same time, it's actually more powerful. So what I'll do here is I'll put equals XLOOKUP. Now, it works the same way to start with. We tell it what we're looking for, comma, but instead of defining a table, we only define a single column. So the lookup array in this case is column G, because that is the column with the phone numbers in it. And the return array, again, is a single column where the answer's coming from, which in this case is column E. We don't have to specify true or false. There's actually 4 match modes, as they're called, and that's another parameter. But the first 3 parameters are mandatory. The second 3 parameters in XLOOKUP are optional. So I'll just close the brackets and enter. And it returns the correct employee ID. I could actually replace the VLOOKUP with an XLOOKUP. So if I put XLOOKUP into C4, again, I'm looking for the phone number, and I'm looking in the column with the phone numbers, and I'm looking for the answer from column J. Close the brackets and enter. So you can see that XLOOKUP is a lot simpler than VLOOKUP. You don't have to worry about true and false. You don't have to worry about setting the order of the columns in the lookup table. You don't have to worry about a column number. You just say, look for this item in this column, and the answer comes from the corresponding row in another column to the left or right. And it also works for rows. It doesn't just have to be data that's in columns. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this session. I hope that it's been useful to you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. My contact details are on the screen right now. And don't forget, I'm delivering a session at ES Tech covering how to turn mundane numbers into exciting visuals using Excel. But until then, have an excellent day.